What makes us a people? In what sense is Jewish peoplehood a collective enterprise? If a collective enterprise is a group of individuals who share something in common, what is it that we share? What moves us from being a religious tradition which focuses on an individual to be a religious tradition that speaks about a collective? What are we talking about? Now, what I would like to offer today and learn with you is two very, very different models of what this collective peoplehood is about, its essence. Now, I'm going to be portraying two radical, distinct models, but they're not meant to function independently. In fact, as we're going to see, they create a mess. They play with each other, they overlap each other. But they're very, very important conceptual models for understanding how our tradition understood our collectivity. Call it our peopleness. One of them is that Jewish people is a Genesis model. And the other one is what I'll refer to as an Exodus model. And what does each one of these models mean? What is a Genesis model? When God said to Abraham, as we saw the last time as well, in Genesis 12, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you." There is no explanation as to why God is picking Abraham. It just doesn't exist. It falls out of nowhere. God turns to Abraham and says, "Go forth, and I will make of you a great nation." And what's so interesting is that Abraham doesn't have to earn it. There is nothing that Abraham does. There is no foundation for the beginning of this collective. Not only is there no moment in which Abraham earns it, but immediately after God says, "I will make of you a great nation," and as you continue to read on in chapter 12, what did we see in verse 7? The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, "I will assign this land to your offspring." With that, God is basically saying it's not this making of you a great nation. It's not just you and a collective. This is going to be an intergenerational principle. God basically says to Abraham, "Go forth. I'm going to make a covenant with you. I'm going to create from you a people. And it's not just a collective. This is going to be a people over time, an eternal covenant between you, between me, and the Jewish people." Now, what is an eternal covenant? What did we do to warrant this eternal covenant? What is it that we have to do to earn it? Who is this people? God says, "I'm making a people, and this people is going to be a people who I'm going to continue to walk with, not just now." It's not that, Abraham, you're going to be fruitful and multiply. You're going to have a lot of kids, a lot of family, life's going to be good for you, and you're going to be a collective. No, it's a collective over time, over generations. It's an eternal covenant. Why? On the basis of what? In the book of Genesis, it's on the basis of nothing that we do. As you saw, the word that appears itself over and over and over again is the word I just mentioned. "I will assign this land to your offspring." If you look in the Hebrew, you'll see zar'acha, to your seed. It repeats itself again in chapter 13. "And the Lord said to Abraham, after Lot had parted from him, 'Raise your eyes and look out from where you are to the north, south, east, west. I will give all the land that you see to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that no one can count the dust. If you can't count the dust of the earth, then your offspring too cannot be counted.'" To be Jewish is to be born Jewish. That's what it meant in Genesis. It's to be part of a family. Steinsaltz uses the term a meta mishpacha. It's an ethnic story. And as such, it has nothing to do with what you do. To be Jewish is a statement of who you are. In the Bible, it was who your father was. Afterwards, in the rabbinic tradition, it was who your mother was. Today, it depends on your denomination, whether it's your mother or your father. Or if you were converted, and ultimately, even after conversion enters into the tradition, it enters as if the conversion is a rebirthing. So it becomes a family that it becomes again who you are. or a family you're married into. It's not something that you do. The book of Genesis offers a very thin notion of Jewishness. In one sense, it's very thick. It's very thick. But when it comes to values and beliefs, it's a very thin story. In fact, what's the first thing that Abraham does? What's the first thing that we learn after Abraham goes to the land that God showed him, and God promises the land to his offspring? And you think that, okay, this is now the Garden of Eden, all life is well. What does Abraham do at the second part of chapter 12? There was a famine in the land, and Abraham went down to Egypt to sojourn there. It's strange. God just said, I'm going to give this land, and Abraham's leaving. The first thing, this is almost parallel to the sin of the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden, you're not supposed to eat of the tree. In the Promised Land, you're just supposed to stay there at least. Just stay there. Don't leave. But that's not what happens. A bit of a famine, and Abraham leaves. And as he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, I know what a beautiful woman you are. Ata yadati. If the Egyptians see you and think she is his wife, they will kill me and let you live. Please say that you are my sister, that it may go well with thee. Abraham, all of a sudden, on his way to Egypt, realizes how beautiful his wife is. He realizes that he's going to be killed. Now, if you were Abraham, what would you do? God just promised you, I'm going to give this to your offspring. I'd say, Sarah, I thought this Egypt was going to be a good idea. I just realized this is not such a good idea. Turn back. Go back. Go back, pray to God, say, God, the God, you promised to give me offspring, to give me this land. God, please bring rain upon your servant, etc., etc. Say something. A little bissel of chivalry, a little bissel of faith, something. What does he do? Says to Sarah, you know what? They're going to kill me because of you, so can you do me a favor? Could you please tell them that you're my sister? Prostitute yourself. They'll take you away from me, but at least I'll live. This is a great moment. This is one of the more embarrassing moments of the book of Genesis. And what happens? Even though Abraham is not deserved, God still protects him. God still protects Sarah. And they leave Egypt with great wealth. You're part of this people. It has nothing to do with what you do. It's who you are. Even when you behave this way, you're still my people. You're still the one who I will protect. It's an unconditional covenant, which is not dependent on what you do, but on who you are. And in many ways, I would suggest to you that you, in a broader stroke, that might be one of the ways in which you should understand the whole book of Genesis. The book of Genesis is a deeply problematic book. It's filled with rich personal narratives and rich stories, but it's not a book of great moral heroes, especially Abraham is special. I'm going to come back to him in a moment. Isaac doesn't do anything. Shadow of a person. Part of what happens when your father tries to kill you. I don't really think you ever get over that one. Jacob, it's not a sweetie pie. Connives, tricks his father. Lives a very, very complex life. Jacob's children, they're already idolaters. The book of Genesis is a book of a family, and as such, a pretty dysfunctional family for that. Or maybe dysfunctionality is the functionality of families, whatever they may be. But it's certainly not a book of the meta-heroes, of the great heroes of Jewish life. These are the people, I have to be, my dream in life is to be like Isaac or to be like Jacob. If anything, Esau seems far more worthy of emulation than Jacob does. So what is the book of Genesis? The book of Genesis is about peoplehood being defined by being, not by doing. And in many ways, it's a paradigm. It's a parody and a paradigm at the same time. It's a story of Jewish peoplehood which is unconditional, as if to say, if this is what we are, and if God remained with us throughout the book of Genesis, then God could remain with us regardless of what we do. If we survive Genesis, then I'm certainly worthy. And you should know this is one of the deeper parts of Jewish peoplehood. And it's one of the reasons why Jesus was never a compelling solution for Jews. Because for Jews, it's not that we thought that people are perfect. It's not that we thought that Jews don't sin or that people don't sin. Just we never perceived sin as affecting our identity. And consequently, if God embraces our collective identity, God's embracing us in the midst of our sin. Jesus' redemption, which allows somebody to be loved by God despite their sin, the book is answered by the book of Genesis and said, I could be loved by God with my sin because I'm part of the Jewish people. And as a result, Jesus is a solution for a problem that Jews don't have. Jesus was necessary for the non-Jewish world, but the book of Genesis is a book which says peoplehood is an eternal covenant between God and the Jewish people. That's what this is, and I don't have to earn it. I receive it through the promise that God gives to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That's the Genesis model. It's an ethnic family model of peoplehood. And in its ideas, faith, practice is very, as I said, is very, very thin. And that's why there is no Torah in the book of Genesis. There are no commandments. There's nothing there. Because if there was, or almost nothing there, it would be pointing to a different notion of identity. Now, the one exclusion is Abraham. And it's interesting. Abraham, there is a complicated figure. Of the forefathers, he's the towering figure in the story. The only one who comes close to him is Rebekah. He's the towering personality, a person of great faith, a person of great moral strength. And God, after promising Abraham that Abraham will be a great nation, God then proceeds to test Abraham over and over again. And Abraham meets those tests. And so there is some notion. Abraham does live a thicker life. Abraham does live a life in which faith, moral strength are part of his being. But they're not the condition for his election. And even when God, in Genesis 22, when God says, Ki ata yadati ki arei Elohim ata, now I know that you are a person who fears God, after Abraham passes the test of the binding of Isaac, what does God give Abraham? If you turn to Genesis 22, what does God say? God says, because, on verse 16, by myself I swear, the Lord declares, because you have done this and not withheld your son, your favored one, I will bestow my blessing upon you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars of the heaven and the sands in the seashore. But God, you gave that to me already. I got that already in Genesis 12 and 13. So Abraham is tested almost as if God is worrying that God gave away too much. But in fact, the core essence of the Genesis model is a model of a covenant, a model of an identity, which is not defined by doing. And one feature of Jewish life, and it's a very, very important one, has nothing to do with what you do. It gets picked up in the rabbinic tradition, in the famous dictum in Tractate Sanhedrin, page 44a. This is one of its more powerful and famous statements of an Israelite, even though they have sinned, they're still an Israelite. To be an Israelite is not contingent on what you do. Now, this is an agadic statement, but in a halachic statement, in Tractate Yevamot, page 47b, what do we see? Here it talks about a convert, someone who converts to Judaism. And what happens if that convert changes his or her mind? What happens? Here it is. I'm a convert. It's like this is the paradigm of someone who I've entered a community of being. And now the convert reverts and says, oops, I made a mistake. I want to worship idols. What do the rabbis say? The rabbis say, after this convert comes up from their ablution, they are deemed to be an Israelite in all respects. What is the practical issue? If he or she retracts their conversion and then betrothed either a daughter or a son of an Israelite, he is considered a sinning or a destroyed or a deviant Israelite, but they're still a deviant Israelite, they're still an Israelite, and your betrothal is valid. Your marriages are binding. Under Jewish law, once you join, you enter into modality of being, and as a result it becomes unconditional and you can never leave. It's who you are. And in the famous ruling, as you saw, of Rabbi Waldenberg, of the woman who converts to Judaism, and then becomes who was born Jewish and then converts to become an Anglican, she petitions the court and says, please accept me back. I want to convert back to Judaism. I made a mistake. I wanted to marry someone. The family insisted that I be an Anglican, so I converted. That's not who I want to be. Please allow me to convert back. And the ultra-Orthodox court in Jerusalem turns this woman down. It says, we can't allow you to convert back to Judaism because you never left. You can no more easily leave Judaism than you can leave or cease being a child to your parents. Even when you convert or when you're born, the modality of Genesis is a modality of being, not a modality of doing. And that's the essence of the Genesis story. It's a story of a family who is, not a family who earns or who behaves as a paradigm. And as such creates a very, very important feature of Jewish identity, which has accompanied us since our inception. Now this notion of ethnicity, of being, of being Jewish through connection to a people, to a nation, and of either through birth or through conversion, which becomes that type of identity, shifts in the book of Exodus. Exodus offers us a very different model of what Jewishness, of what Jewish peoplehood is about. The notion of Jewish peoplehood, however, is not exhausted by the Genesis model, but our tradition offers us another competing model. It's a model that I'll refer to as the Exodus model. And the shift of the Exodus model begins in Exodus chapter 3. Exodus chapter 3 starts with Genesis. Moses is tending the flock in chapter 3 of his father-in-law Jethro, sees the burning bush, and then God says to Moses in verse 6, and he said, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, that's who I am. God refers to God's self as the God of the ethnic family. That's still the Genesis mode. And that Genesis mode continues in verse 16, when God says, go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me. Again, who am I? I am the God. I'm speaking to you because we are a family. We are a community of people who passes on that Jewishness merely by being. And then God says, I have taken note of what you have done, of what is being done to you in Egypt, and I have declared, I will take you out of the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm going to take you out. I'm going to give you that land that I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But then, this is again Genesis. But right here, the Exodus mode enters into the tradition. Therefore, go to, they will listen to you, these elders, and you shall go with the elders of Israel to the king of Egypt, and you shall say, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, manifested himself to us. Now, therefore, let us go a distance of 3 days into the wilderness to sacrifice to the Lord our God. You notice the inconsistency? When we go to Pharaoh, we don't say, let my people go. That's the song. It's, let my people go so that they may worship me in Sinai. Now, why do we do that? If we want to defeat Pharaoh, and the notion is that God has come back to embrace God's people and is going to destroy the evil empire who's subjugating God's people, then why not say to Pharaoh, let my people go because they are my people? That would be the moment. Ultimately, that's what happens. But here the Exodus modality, a different mode of thinking about Jewish peoplehood, enters into our tradition. What happens is that God is putting into the story of the Exodus not just the story of freedom from, but a story of freedom to be. A freedom to be a people who worship God and live by God. God is interjecting God itself into the story. And according to the Exodus model, Jewish peoplehood is not just a modality of being, it's a modality of doing. It's a modality of living with God. In many ways, it's what Abraham did unconditionally. Now, God is saying, this is what I want from you. Almost to say, I don't really want a continuation of the book of Genesis. Frankly, I had enough of it. And all the fascinating commentaries about the richness of the family and the complexity of the nuances, it's just great. It's mediocre. It's embarrassing. I want more from you. And in the Exodus story, it ceases to be simply a story of liberation so that we will return to the land. Sinai enters into our narrative in the book of Exodus. And God wants Sinai to be put into the conversation with Pharaoh, as if to say, Isaiah Berlin speaks about two concepts of liberty, negative liberty and positive liberty. The negative liberty is freedom from external constraint. It's a liberty which defines liberal democracies, in which no society could cross a line and determine for a person how they ought to live their life, as long as that person is not harming others. Under positive liberty, that's a notion which more often than not define totalitarian regimes, in which you are free to be who you ought to be. And very often then, a certain society will say, I know who you ought to be, and I'm going to force you to be. I'm not forcing you to be who you're not. I'm forcing you to be I'm unfolding your deepest potential. That notion of positive liberty is really what's entering into Exodus, where God's saying, peoplehood is not simply about being whoever you want to be, simply by virtue of who your ancestors are. That Jewish peoplehood is about living in accordance to a certain system. And it's right here in Exodus 3, in the shift of the narrative to Pharaoh, that the inkling of this concept is introduced. It's picked up again in Exodus 6, with the notion of God saying in verse 7, and I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. This is the covenantal relationship now, is I want to be your God. And the paradigm of that really is introduced first and most foremost in Exodus 19. And let's read that together. On the third new moon after the Israelites had gone forth from the land of Egypt, on that very day they entered the wilderness of Sinai. Having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain, and Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, saying, Thus shall you say to the house of Jacob and declare to the children of Israel, You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to me. Now then, if you will obey me faithfully and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession amongst all the people. Indeed, all the earth is mine, but you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Two very critical additions, which would be impossible in Genesis. What are they? The first is now then if, on verse 5, there's a condition. You have to earn to be a part of the Jewish people. And the second is that to be a Jewish people is to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. It's not simply to be the descendants of Abraham. It's not simply to run around and to do all the stuff that Jacob's children did. Miserable things. Imagine, almost compare, kingdom of priests, holy nation, and Jacob's children. Two completely different pictures of Jewish peoplehood. We are the children of Israel, literally. What is the children of Israel? Speak to the children of Israel. The children of Israel historically, the children of Jacob, were mediocre, sinful, corrupt, idolatrous, adulterous, murderous, torturing of their parents, conniving. And now who are the children of Israel? They must be unto me. It's not who they are. They must earn the ability to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And this notion of kingdom of priests, what greater notion? It's this aspirational vision that I don't want you to be like mediocre. I want from you everything. I want from you the heights. And if in other nations that heights are controlled by a minority who are the priests, who are the mediators between the individual, the sinning individual and God, what I want from you is I want you to earn this to such an extent that you're a kingdom of priests. You don't need that mediator. This is the essence of the Exodus model. It's a thickening of the Jewish conversation. It's a thickening of Jewish peoplehood. The Jewish peoplehood now is not just a being, but it pushes you. It's here, faith, values, Torah, mitzvah, culture, language, all the various features that constitute a rich life. This is personified by the book of Exodus. And then an absolutely remarkable thing happens. It's one of the more remarkable things, and it's also one of the funnier things in the Torah. I know you have to have a certain sense of humor, but we rabbis actually think this is humorous. Moses then comes to the Jewish people and says to the Jewish people, the rules are different. It's a different story now. How do you feel about it? And then all the people answered and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. For one moment, the Jewish people turn to God and say, we accept. We accept the new story. We accept that to be Jewish means to accept a way of life. All that you commanded, we will do. Ultimately, in our tradition, it's like, na'aseh v'nishma. We will do and then we will listen. It's almost a reverse of the unconditionality of Genesis. God says to Abraham, I am going to commit myself to your children regardless of what you do. The kingdom of priests obligates them and commits themselves to God regardless of what you command us. We're there. Now, what's so funny about this is that this is the only time, this was just words. The Jewish people never, ever really lived up to this notion. Now, we have these two models. Now, the whole story of the Bible is not the story of the replacement of one model or the victory of one, but it's the intersection of these models. In many ways, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the Bible is a story of a Jewish people who accept the Genesis model and a God who expects an Exodus model. God speaks the language of Exodus, and we live the covenant of Genesis. And that's why God and the Jewish people never get together in the Bible. We can never make it. And that's why the rabbis, the paradigm of this is the Song of Songs. The two lovers who can never ever get together. They could only yearn, but they're never on the same page. The reason we're never on the same page is that we have two different notions, or really we bought into two different notions. The Judaism of the Bible, the Jewish people never really accepted Exodus. And that's why the Bible ends with exile. God kicks the Jewish people out. And that introduces a very interesting notion. Is exile a principle which undermines the unconditionality of Genesis? Now, in the non-Jewish world, that's one of the classic interpretations. One of the classic interpretations is that if you look at your standing, look at your status in history. That status is indicative of the fact that God has left you. If God was still with you in the Genesis model, then why would exile be a feature of your life? Look at the Bible gives many answers, but let's look at the rabbinic answer, which tries to combine the Genesis and Exodus model together. Let's turn to Tractate Sanhedrin 97b. Rav said, all the predestined dates for redemption have passed. Jews, you sinned. I don't need to punish you anymore. The sentence is over. Its change in history is waiting. But what will create that change in history? And the matter is now dependent only on repentance and good deeds. Rav is in essence an Exodus Jew. That's who he is. He says, this is the covenant. It's not that you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. If you just even want to be a people who gets to reside again in the land of Israel, you have to live up to the Exodus model. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. The Exodus model for Rav, in a deep sense, overrides the Genesis model. The only significance of the Genesis model for Rav is that God always will await us. You always have the potential to return. And in this sense, this is Rav's rejection of the Christian analysis of the Jewish history and the Jewish story. Rav accepts that our sinning, that our suffering is an indication of God's displeasure. Accepts that. But while in the Christian narrative or analysis of this, God therefore moved on to somebody else, for Rav, God always awaits us. That's what Genesis for Rav becomes. The notion of Jewish peoplehood for Rav is that we always have the door open to become again the people of Exodus. We never ever get kicked out of school. It's suspended. But one of the interesting questions is, could it be suspended? How long could something be suspended before you basically say the story's over? And one of the interesting questions is that if you buy into an Exodus model, do you really have to, and you buy into the conditionality of it, does it really in essence not contradict the Genesis model of the unconditionality of Jewishness? And here the covenant can be overridden. And Rav says it's now dependent on you. And if you don't repent, basically, we're going to continue to be in exile forever. This is rejected by the other Rabbi Samuel, who says, it is sufficient for a mourner to keep his mourning. Or it's sufficient in the Hebrew, Dai la'avel she'yamod be'evlo. It's sufficient for a mourner to stand in their mourning. In other words, just like in Exodus, if you go back to Exodus 3, what does God say? On Exodus 3, verse 7, God says, and the Lord continued, I have marked well the plight of my people in Egypt, and have heeded their outcry because of their taskmasters. Yes, I am mindful of their suffering. I have come down to rescue them from the Egyptians, to bring them, etc. What do we do to earn the redemption of Egypt? In the Genesis model, which still functioned there, the answer is nothing. God promises the land of Israel to Abraham's descendants, and God says you're going to go into exile because the sin of the Amorites is not yet complete. But ultimately, once their sin is complete, you get your land back. You're there again. You just have to suffer. That's what Rav says. Shmuel says, that's it. Dai la'avel she'amod be'evlo. It is, for him, the Genesis model is going to be the paradigm for the future redemption. But it's interesting that this is a later generation of rabbis, there's an earlier version of this debate. This matter is disputed by Tanaim, by earlier rabbis, who lived immediately after the destruction of the temple, between the period, roughly 70 to about 200. Rabbi Eliezer said, if Israel repent, they will be redeemed. If not, they will not be redeemed. Straight and forward, the Exodus model. But Rabbi Joshua says, if they do not repent, will they not be redeemed? Is it possible? Is it possible that our covenant could be suspended forever? How you can't. Exodus can't replace Genesis. They have to coexist. So he comes up with a new answer. How do they coexist? But the Holy One, blessed be he, will set up a king over them, whose decrees shall be as cruel as Haman's, whereby Israel shall engage in repentance and thus bring them back to the right. What's his answer? God will never give up on us. But it's not that God's going to redeem us if we don't deserve it. We still have to earn it. But God's going to create a precondition in history which is going to force us to look at and to become introspective about who we are. And so God will bring about the repentance that God yearns for. The eternality of the conflict, of the covenant of Genesis, is not that it will be suspended for eternality, but God will always wait. It's suspended, but God will constantly try to do everything in God's power to get us to become Exodus Jews again. God will not walk with us as Genesis Jews. But God, because of the covenant of Genesis, will never give up on us and constantly try to activate it so that we could become Exodus Jews. Now these are two models. And as you see, the model of Genesis is also in Exodus, and some of the Exodus also appears in Genesis, in particular in the life of Abraham. So I'm not presenting them as exclusive to the books, but they're conceptual models, as in any conceptual model. Their strength lies in their simplicity. Now we have to remember that the reality of peoplehood is not a concept, it's a living organism. And as a result, it's not an either or, it's a struggle between them. The Bible is a struggle between them. Our tradition, you can see here, what is it? How do we see our relationship with God? How do we see ourselves? How do we balance the two? And we never truly free ourselves from either of them. They remain in different forms as two polarities which define very, very different visions of what it means to be a member of this people. But let's now reflect as we conclude on what are the implications of this in a contemporary conversation. I sometimes feel that I'm at a, I imagine many Jews feel that they are exactly in a transition moment, that they're the transition moment of Jewish history. I look at my life and I say, there is no doubt I'm a Genesis Jew. I live a Jewish life of Exodus, but first and foremost, I'm a Genesis Jew. I'm like Jerry Maguire, where you had me at hello. The Jewish people, you have me at hello. My commitment to Jewish peoplehood, to Judaism, starts first and foremost from my connection to this people. And my connection and commitment to the Jewish people is unconditional. For me to be Jewish is first and foremost a feeling of who I am. It's not what I do. What I do comes afterwards. But it's just simply who I am. And I feel bound to anybody who's part of this family. Whether matrilineal, patrilineal, converted, married to, if you see yourself as part of, I'm not getting into halachic definition. And in a living reality of a people, you don't do that. And I think the Zionists understood that with their very expansive law of return. This is my people. I walk with you. I've walked with you in the past. I'm walking with you in the present. I'm bound to you. That's the way I see who I am. Now, Exodus comes as a second tier, never replaces Genesis. Now, precisely because of who I am, I now aspire that my people, my family, become a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. I want more of, but it's never a condition. And that's why when the Jewish people fail, it's my problem. This is who, I don't get ashamed, I get angry. Because this is not who we ought to be. But there's never a distancing between me and the Jewish people. And that's why also it has a profound effect on my relationship to Israel. This is my people. Do I think Israel's always right? No. But it's not a conditional relationship. The aspirations are secondary. They come. But they come precisely because it's my family. Just like my children, I want from my children something. The expression of my love is that I yearn for them to become more, not simply to be. But my love is always grounded on them being. It's never grounded on who they become. My love generates respect, which generates a sense of expectation. But the love is always unconditional. But one of the interesting features in contemporary Jewish life is this language that I just spoke about is increasingly challenged, as I mentioned in the first lecture. There are many Jews who I'm getting all excited and all moved, and people are looking and yawning. They don't share it. And one of the things you find is that it's even very frustrating. You don't know how to even explain it. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say. Like, how do I teach an identity of Genesis to a generation which feels it's an individual experience. It's a universal experience or a different one. It's very hard. Very often you either have this or you don't have it. Unto itself, it's very difficult. It's even very alienating. And one of the generational challenges, and sometimes you get frustrated, is something that you love so deeply. You can't communicate it to someone. You can't explain it. And it could create a very strong sense of alienation and judgmentalism, and we have to avoid that. Because it's not that another generation is doing something wrong. They're just different than we are. Or who's we? They're different than I am. Maybe I'm in the minority. That's just who I am. One of the things that I'd like to suggest is that if in prior generations, Genesis is the foundation on which Exodus stands, it's very possible that in our generation, Exodus is the foundation on which Genesis has to stand. I believe that it's critical for us to have a notion of Jewishness, which is who we are. It's not always conditional, because then it'll become judgmental, and then we'll descend to denominationalism, and if I don't agree with you, you're out, and it's conditional. Jewishness has to be thicker and larger and longer than that. But we have to re-earn the claim of a loyalty of being. And you could only reclaim that loyalty if we answer the challenge of why be? Who is this? When we are a people who stand for something, when we are a people who embody some of the Exodus narrative, then we become a community which could then transcend what we do and celebrate being unto itself. But we have to earn that reality again. But herein lies the challenge of contemporary Jewish life. Peoplehood is being challenged, but where peoplehood is entering into the discourse, people are often looking for a content to being which goes beyond ethnicity. But to put a content into being beyond ethnicity, you have to give time. Genesis is unconditional, and as a result, you don't have to earn it. Exodus is conditional. It has to be earned, but to earn something, you have to spend the time. If you don't spend the time, you can't become. Very often I feel that the catch-22 of contemporary Jewish life is that the basic standard is a standard of meaning, a standard of earning something, of values. But we're not spending enough time to create a Jewish community which embodies them. It's almost as if we want to be Exodus Jews with a commitment of Genesis Jews. That's the catch-22. We give Judaism a small bandwidth, and we want it to be meaningful. We don't learn or observe sufficiently, and we want Judaism to inspire us. You want to be inspired? You want Judaism to be something compelling? You want Judaism to answer the claim and the call of Exodus, you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. You want that claim? That's not something you inherit. That's something you have to earn. But we've created Jewish institutions and experiences where the bandwidth is so narrow. The bandwidth we have is a Genesis bandwidth, and the expectations we want or we yearn for are that of Exodus. Unless we expand the bandwidth of our institutions and our experiences, we will constantly frustrate ourselves, and we will constantly undermine the content of Jewish peoplehood and make it something that can never transcend and return to its place at the core of Jewish life. We're not going to tell people, as I said in the prior lecture, you have to accept peoplehood. We can inspire them to it. And the Exodus and Genesis modalities each tell a different story of what that might be. Not as exclusive models, but as models which challenge and together thicken the conversation of peoplehood. And I hope create, in different ways, a catalyst for people. In prior generations, that catalyst might have been Genesis followed by Exodus, followed by Genesis, but it starts with Genesis. In our generation, it's going to have to be a little Exodus, shifting quick to Genesis maybe, then back to Exodus, but it has to start with that Exodus. And whether our community is willing to recognize that we're in a different reality, and it's going to require of us a different focus and a different dynamic, and that the synthesis and the inner tensions are going to be different, is going to determine to what extent this idea of peoplehood is going to be something that's going to engage and inspire. Thank you.